Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. I do hope you can hear me clearly at the back. Excellent, they're nodding. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my talk about a very small nation, which used to be a great nation. And they are trying their very best to maintain whatever culture is left of them. They are, after all, scattered all over the world, and you shall find out as to why. The people who I'm referring to are called in English as the Circassians. And the Circassians are a small ethnic group of the northwest part of the Caucasus region. They are not Russians, they are not Slavic, they are not Eastern European. They have their very own unique ancient culture. Some scholars say that they date back tens of thousands of years. There are dolmens and megaliths dating back to that era. This is what they say. And they have their own unique spiritual practice when it comes to dolmens, which I shall explain in a bit. As for the Circassians' location, it used to stretch to what we now call Ukraine. And at the time, Ukrainians did not exist. They were called a different name. And they were perhaps very different in terms of their culture, their language. And the Circassians spread up until the beginning of the Ukrainian border, what we now call the Ukrainian border, or seen as the Ukrainian border. But the Russians came along centuries later. The Russians are about 600 to 1,000 years old at the most as a culture. They're quite new. And they are of Slavic background. And some say Slav means attribution to slave. For some reason, a group of slaves were formed, and by time they grew in number and began to take over different regions and nations. It's a very sad history of the Circassians between the 1700s to the 1800s. It's my least favorite thing to talk about them because it is a very sad time. But prior to that, they were a much far happier bunch. They used to practice unusual spiritual practices, which to this day they still practice, which is nice to hear. And quite frankly, dare I say it very bluntly and openly, far more humane, progressive, and loving than the Abrahamic religions. The Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, don't teach how to feel the love in you in a very clear, consistent way. If you read their books, there isn't much feeling work taught in it. But maybe they did in the beginning. We don't know. None of us were there. Unless if a time machine appears, please do let us know. It'd be lovely. And tell them don't ruin it. And in fact, don't tell women to get subjugated and feel oppressed and then feel that they are not as worthy as men. Because if you read their texts cover to cover, there isn't much emphasis on equality between men and women in a complete sense of the word, which is sad. And yes, we are different, two different genders, we have our differences. But in terms of intelligence, in terms of human rights, in terms of kindness, both genders deserve kindness. And today I see a very sad, negative backlash against straight white men. And it's just ridiculous. It's just silly. Men are as important as women. And there's no need to demean any gender for any reason, be it religious or cultural or whatever. It's just insane. There's no need for these negative mistreatments, should I call them. There absolutely is no need for them. So yes, I dithered. I am the master rambler. The queen of randomness, as some would call. But anyways, before I continue dithering, there are a couple of people I'd love to thank. Claire Hodge, who patiently made my Circassian dress based on my own design, and Jane Walton, who patiently made my hat. She created the mold for the hat, and I asked her to keep the mold because I'd love her to design more Circassian hats for me. And I was thinking in terms of Circassian dresses and hats. Here we have a group of Circassian ladies dressed in traditional Circassian, what they call fashion in Circassian. The hats represent, in an unusual description it may be, a connection to the cosmos. So you bring down energy back into the body and beyond. So it's a connection, so it's like an extension of their bodies. All ancient cultures, be it ancient Egyptian, Sumerian, etc., they all wore an aspect, even if an aspect of them, tall hats. And this is to represent an extension of their aura and connection to the cosmos and back again into their bodies and back again into Mother Earth. Now, I can't find an up-close picture of a lady wearing these in color, but there are illustrations. She's wearing upon her feet leather shoes, which are very tight-fitting, and upon the leather shoes, I'm trying to describe it now, it's so tricky. So basically, she slips her feet into a pair of slippers which have elevated platforms. This is worn for ceremonial purposes or ritual dances. Circassians are very spiritual. They have a very spiritual way of living, a very spiritual way of feeling. To them, everything in life is based on love. You have to love yourself, love women, love men, love children, love animals, plants, and if you want to take something from nature, before you consider taking, you ask its permission. May I have what you can offer me? So let's say a hunter or a huntress, because we have female hunters as well in our culture, wants to go out hunting. They connect their soul to the soul of the animal. If it's a mother, they leave it alone. If it isn't, they ask its permission. I would like to make use of your existence. And if they sense a permission is given back to them, then they hunt it down, and they have a certain technique of disarming the animal. Same thing with plants. And if you chop a tree down, you must grow at least one in its place. And that's after you gain its permission on a soul-to-soul basis. And here's an up-close, zoomed-in image of the hats. The motifs are based on plants. If you look at Art Nouveau in a Western context, it's the same idea of the curves. They're taken from plants, and it's a stylized variant of a plant. They used to sew leaves upon their dresses, and they used to come up the trees. And I'm going to say something jokey. The moment I met Trevor, I thought to myself, I'm going to say this and see if he still wishes to speak to me. I know, shocking. I came up to him and we started chatting, and with me is Tim and another Tim. Two lovely Tims in my life, among the many. And so basically I said to Trevor, oh, by the way, did you know that Circassians talk to trees as their friends? If they're having a bad day, to this day they do this at the Caucasus. If you ever see a Circassian talking to a tree, including me, it's a very normal thing to do. And he just looked at me like this. He turned around and looked at me. And I thought to myself, this is it, Ridade. This is the fork in the road moment. He may or may not wish to speak to you anymore, but he came up to me and said, is that right? and he carried on looking at me in a perplexed way, and I'm thinking maybe he's still deciding. But then he carried on talking to me, and I asked him, I was wondering if you'd stop talking to me. He went, no, what you said there, I realized, is a very mild thing for me to handle. Something in these words. Bless you. Thank God. And by the way, the embellishments I have are from AliExpress. I couldn't believe my eyes. Circassian embellishments. Good Lord. We exist even at AliExpress. We have a name. Oh my God. Anyway, so thanks to them, I managed to find these, which is lovely. It's such a nice find. In my last talk, I spoke about spiritual practices and spiritual healing methods and also other forms of coping mechanisms, healthy ones, if in case you are feeling distressed or down. And in this one, I shall share some furthermore spiritual practices, some cultural, historical aspects of the Circassians. I shall also share how they court one another, which is very unusual. So I do hope we still remain friends after I finish. So my full name is Ridade Stardust, the way a Circassian would pronounce it. But I do love the anglicized variant of my first name, which is Ridade. And because my surname changed from Dagestani to Al-Dagestani, which made it sometimes impossible to see it printed on an ID card. No exaggeration, Al-Dagesta. I resorted to having Stardust as my surname. I love David Bowie, that's the reason why. And the second reason is I thought Dagestani is not an actual surname, it's a reference to the person who carried his identity, his cultural identity, which is my great-grandfather. He never wrote down his family name, so to this day we don't know what his actual surname is. When he migrated to Jordan from the Caucasus, they referred to him as the Dagestani. So Al means the in Arabic, Al. And when they changed my surname in Jordan, thank you very much, from Dagestani to Al-Dagestani, I asked my father, why Dad? And he went quiet and he said, sounds like, you know what, we should keep it. It sounds like Al Pacino. Thanks, Dad. Now people will look at that and think, dodgy. One of those mafiosos. Thank God they didn't. Thank God.
Okay, is in Italiano.
Yes, it goes in Italiano. I'm replicating what our friend in the audience is saying. So, I have to refer what Luigi Spaffi said about awareness because it is something we practice as much as we can. I mean, no one is perfect. But Luigi Spaffi, our mutual friend, and a lovely New Sheridan Club member said, first comes, if you want to evolve, develop, change to a better person, first comes self-awareness. Without it, you don't change. Then comes the willpower to change. No willpower, no change. And I stared at him and I said, you know, I'm going to remember your words from here till eternity. And I'm going to try practicing them. Because I'm sure there are things in there, whatever they are, which need addressing, because we all have something to work on. And that's life. So, Circassians. This is also another aspect of Circassian dress. Reds are very popular, in addition to white, gold, silver. The threading that they use is usually made out of metal, so a lot of hard craftsmanship, a hard level of craftsmanship is needed to execute this level in ancient times, and I'm saying 1800s and prior to that. And then, of course, in later eras, it became easy to find replicas or lightweight embroidery, etc., to compensate metallic thread. Because no way can we do any work dressed up like that. So this is only worn for wearing for guests, greeting guests at home, ceremonial rituals, etc. As for the men, now you probably would notice that this young man is wearing these seemingly cylindrical shapes upon his chest. There is a story behind them. Each pocket carries a silver, usually sterling silver, cylindrical tube with intricate Circassian motifs on it. One carries gunpowder, another carries powdered soup, dried powdered soup. Another carries herbs to heal wounds. They have a very strong affinity to nature. Another carries a lock of their lover's hair or their wife's hair. Another carries a script or a scroll of prayers to the universe. So in case they get frightened, they open it up and they read it. And so on and so forth. They have their own uses. Now, what the Russians didn't know, and it used to perplex them when they were fighting against Circassians, how is it that they had a seemingly infinite supply of catgut string used as part of a bow that they would be using during archery, moments of practicing archery? The Circassian men would have hidden in the lining of their, what we call in Circassian, tse, which is this cloak. They would have it hidden here in the piping of the coat. And so they'd extract it from the piping of their coat and tie it to their bow before they proceed to fight. And then this young man would have upon his back sort of like a cylindrical shaped or triangular shaped bag carrying arrows. And they carried roughly about a dozen arrows, some say more, some say less. Varies from tribe to tribe. And if you carried 3 arrows as a symbol when entering a new village you've never been to before, and you lift your hand up, it means I come in peace. And they turn around, showing 3 arrows. It's a symbol of peace. I come here in peace. Do you know where waving comes from? This is a potential reason where waving comes from, so please take it with a pinch of salt and don't hold it against me. In our language, hand means a. The ancient city of Athens is Athena. A means hand. Ta means God in Circassian. Na means eye, the all-seeing eye in the hand of God. And it is said that a lot of the ancient Greek language is affected by Circassian language. A Greek philosopher came to the Caucasus and was so taken away by their mythological folk tales, he took some of it and spread it in Greece. If you were to look up a book by John Colarusso, of which I will show the image to you, which he wrote the Nart sagas, there are some interesting similarities. So it's interesting to know about it. Now, in terms of this seemingly scarf-like shape around his neck, we call it sharwan. Shah means head, rwan means cover. It's made out of pure wool. And usually, men wear it because they go out fighting while women stay at home looking after children. However, if push comes to shove and women are needed to fight and they feel the will to fight and they can, they're not heavily pregnant, etc., they would fight along with their men. Circassians are a matriarchal society. Women are in charge of everything. As soon as a lady walks into a room, all men rise and they stand. And they wait till she is seated. Once she is seated, then they sit down. And then they ask her for ideas, strategies. They consult her soul. Can you please tell us, using your intuition, what should we do about this and that problem? We seem to have an issue about, for example, this and that enemy encroaching us. What shall we do? They are strategists. And they used to make weapons from start to finish. They made chainmail, they made swords, and to this day there are still Circassian women who make swords the traditional way. I know one Circassian lady through my mother. She does an excellent job of it. And I looked at her work and I thought it would probably take me 20 years to reach her caliber. It's a lot of work. Now, we are here at this moment in London. Hello, darling. Not too far away. Well, quite a distance. This is the Black Sea. That's the Caspian Sea. And the Caucasus Mountains reach from the Black Sea all the way across the Caspian Sea. And this is where I was born, Jordan. Both my parents came from Circassia. My great-grandfather comes from Dagestan, which is the east side of the Caucasus. Dagestanians are very similar-minded to Circassians. Sadly, sometime later, all this territory which used to belong to Circassians shrunk by the Russians. This is the Circassian flag, and I name the tribes. Natchwe, Mamkhuk, Jané, Beslane, Abzak, Jadou, Hatukwe, Kabardé, Shhapsil, Tamerwe, Wubuch, Yagurkwe. These are among the last few tribes left in the Caucasus. There used to be more, but the Russians killed many of them. I do hope I've mentioned them all. My mother is part Abzakh, part Shhapsil. My father is part Abzakh, Shhapsil, and Dagestanian. And again, before I proceed, the 3 arrows representing I come in peace, but if you attack, we are at war. Looking at the alphabet, as you can see, they are all almost representative drawings. And it may sound strange, but they are forms of energy. Each has an energy about it.
Sorry, can you tell us what the apostrophe, the superscript W means?
Which one?
Well, a lot of them have, like a T, there's like
the apostrophe, it's a. That's a. So,
so at the beginning we've got t and then
and so there are different sounds. We have over 50 sounds, and they vary from tribe to tribe. It's a linguist's table.
On consonants.
Yes, emphasis on
like
consonants. More consonants than what an Arab would use. So sometimes you'd see 2 consonants next to each other without a vowel in the middle between them. For example, if I were to say I love you in Circassian, it's sh-u-s-shaw. So there's a sh-r. And it's quite difficult for an English person to say shao, which represents the word love. And it's interesting that they hear this, they go shao. You know, some people do catch it, but most people can't. Because it sounds a bit like Welsh in some senses, you know, like Llangollen, there's that double L aspect. But it's tricky to have 2 consonants of unusual sounds put together, being pronounced in a way where if I were to ask an English person to pronounce it, most of them would not be able to do so. I'm thinking of another word. So there are some words like gu, guapa. It sounds like as if there's consonant, vowel. So guapa means my heart, or the seat of my heart. And when someone says, I don't like it, sigir harap, you can hear more variants of vowels. We have many vowels. We have and it's so confusing for linguists. But they love the complexity of it. Sorry, did you want to ask something else?
No, that.
So there we have it. My husband thought they reminded him of Lord of the Rings alphabet. This is also, so that one is more slightly digitalized somewhat, but this is more handwritten. So you have a more clear idea that they're more cursive, there's more softness in the curvature. So this used to be the Circassian region, now shrunk into a much smaller size. That's an image of the diaspora. My least favorite phase. 21st of May, 1864 is the day where Circassians left the Caucasus after over 100 years of war against the Russians. The Russians gave them 3 choices after they lost the war. You either live under our rule, or be our slaves, or leave. Very nice of them. So, one of my least favorite phases. It is estimated over 1 million Circassians left. Some say 600,000. The figures vary. And as you can see, pardon me, jumped a bit there. They have worn, torn clothes. This is them just freshly arriving into Turkey. And even though they are tired, traumatized, they still stand with pride. They cannot tolerate the idea of being seen as weak, male or female, by the way. Bless them. This is Maykop, the capital city of Adige. Adige is the Circassian word for Circassia. And as you can see, very neatly laid out streets. This is a modern, of course, zoomed in image of what it looks like from a 90-degree viewpoint. Just to give you an idea of how neat and tidy they are, they win awards for having the cleanest streets in the whole of the Russian Federation. One of Putin's favorite places to stay is Sochi, which is in the Caucasus. This is another example.
The property prices there now are higher than New York and London. Sanctions aren't higher.
Or maybe his double does. Conspiracy theory that he has a double. This is also another aspect of Circassian dress. Women carry tiny pouches upon their person, and what they carry is a plethora of little things. Herbs, plants, in a tiny pouch within that pouch. They also carry knitting or sewing materials, small, tiny items to keep busy because they love craft work. They could spend their whole lives doing it. And they would tie the pouch upon their person, upon their belt. This is a selection of what Circassians look like, because people quite often ask me, what do they look like? So that's one variant. I had one Circassian teacher who looked very much like her. Her name was Maya. We have a Circassian school in Jordan. And may I add, what a variety of characters they had. She'd walk in, looking at us like a hawk with her huge green eyes. And we all stood up, not a word, not a sound. And she does this, meaning sit down. And then she walks in. She goes, I'm watching you. And we think, what a nice, quaint, dainty lady. Bless her, quite a character. And this is also another variant of Circassian features. Again, lovely hat, if I may add, beautiful. And sometimes Circassian women adorn the sides of their faces with embellishments. Could be metallic or metallic thread. This is the usual Circassian feature. Fine hair, but lots of it. High cheekbones, light green eyes or dark green eyes. Very, very common among Circassians. This is also another aspect of Circassian dress. One of the physical features of Circassians, be it male or female, is the small waistline. I know several male Circassian friends, whenever they gain a tiny bit of weight, they panic. And I tell them, you look fine. No, this won't do. I really can't go out like this. I don't want to put off any potential suitors. And we do have blonde, blue-eyed people, but not as much as the fair-skinned, dark-haired, green-eyed ilk. That's also another variant of Circassian hat. Dresses, Circassian dancer. This is also another variant of Circassian features. variant of the embellishments that they have upon their person. The buttons in the middle originally would fasten in the middle, and they'd be made out of either sterling silver or gold. But because for a dancer to wear that, it's quite heavy. So this is the more modernized variant of it. This is a traditional Circassian dress. The photograph is from 1870. As you can see, that's the original metallic fastening in the middle. This is a very unusual situation. It was not a case of bad hair day. In America in the 1800s, there came a very strange era of Circassian girls, showgirls. And they'd be claiming that they are true Circassian women. Because when it spread from the Ottoman Empire that Circassian women are famed for their beauty, some Americans thought, let us invent a hoax and make people believe that these women are true Circassians, a very rare beauty to find, and have a showcase of them. And so you have different variants of women portraying themselves. And then they decided to create merchandise, Circassian hair dye, for changing light red or grey hair to a beautiful brown or black. And what do you know?
Mine doesn't work.
Well, if John A. Jones is still around, you might find him.
John!
Well, based in Baltimore. It says here, price $1 per bottle. Quite expensive for the time. And here's a poster of Zaluma Agra, Star of the East, now on exhibition at Barnum's Museum. What do we know? This is a Circassian gentleman wearing what we call in Circassian pa'or. The Russians and Cossacks ripped off this hat. No hard feelings. Believe me, they did. We existed way long before them. Bless them. This is a Circassian young man with the pa'or, the sei, and the Circassian dagger. Now, the Circassian dagger has 3 grooves in it, in the middle of it. That's for a gory detail here, so take a deep breath. Easy penetration. I know, terrible times. By the way, from age 7 onwards, they teach children how to fight and use weapons. And if they misbehave, they make them scrub the floors, clean the barns, clean horses. Horses are a huge part of Circassian way of life. My great-uncle from my mother's side used to own over 100 horses in his farm in Turkey. And they used to quietly creep up upon the roof of one of the barns and wait for the wild horses to return come dusk. And they would not make a single move, because one move and they all run back into the woods. And then he'd quietly whisper into my mother's ear, which one would you like to have? And of course, she would momentarily have the freedom to ride it, but he's a tradesman. He had to sell his horses, especially when they just began to run out of fashion, because at the time, automobiles became more prevalent than usage of horses. Of course, there are, pardon me, a plethora of little embellishments that a Circassian man would wear. The less the embellishments, the lower the rank. The higher the embellishments and more intricate, the higher the rank. We have classes in Circassia, but not based on titles, based on manners. The more well-mannered you are, the more noble you are. The Russian Tsar used to send his children to noble ilk of Circassians to teach his Russian children good manners. This is an old picture from the 1800s. I believe this man is carrying a wealth of trauma. Bless him. I'm not at all surprised as to why. And here we have a modern generation. They're probably taking a break from dancing because they're not wearing their hats. I danced in a Circassian dance troupe for more than 10 years. Never got paid, and neither did the other dancers, and it never bothered us that we never got paid, because we were doing it out of love of dancing, because Circassians are danceaholics. And here we have another selection. These are Circassians in Israel. The greatest population of Circassians are in Turkey, 4 million of them. Every year they congregate in a town called Eskişehir, meaning old town in Turkish. And they congregate there, and that's where a lot of courting action takes place. And here we have Circassians celebrating, well, not exactly celebrating, but more so commemorating 1864. First, they stand in silence, and then they give thanks to their ancestors for surviving and fighting. And then they announce, let us continue to live and prosper. And then the dances and singing begins as a celebration of life and continuity of it. And what I love is also the fact that they have no shame in openly singing, even when it is very emotional and they cry. They continue in between their moments of crying. They just have no qualms. They don't hold it back. They just sing their hearts out. And it's a cathartic way to release any ancestral pain. I have experienced release of ancestral pain through a Reiki healing, and my God, I had no idea how much I was carrying in me. It's incredible, it really is. And this is in Turkey, Circassians in Turkey. It says here in Turkish, unutmadık, meaning we have not forgotten. 21st of May, 1864. This is a Circassian guard in Jordan. He's one of the royal guards, of which the royal family entrust. And this is them in their official gear, in their official, beautifully made tseis. I mean, to me, this is just wonderful work. And I love the photograph. Very proud people. There are some things about the Caucasus which is very unusual. What you see here is a female warrior. And for many centuries, for a European country to herald a female warrior very highly and persistently is not very common. And I'm sorry if I sound that I'm being negative, but the fact is, I go into a museum of, let's say, German or Austrian or French, and there are a few female fighters being mentioned. And I don't know why. I haven't read the history of each of those cultures. But in Circassian culture, because it's matriarchal, a female warrior is called Tirgatan. And they are heralded very highly, as much as men. Don't worry, we treat our men well. We're not, we're not going to diminish their power or anything like that. And as you can see, she's armed to the hilt. You could probably just about make out her bow and arrow paraphernalia carried upon her person. And she is among those which protects the dolmens. The adigs or adigas that inhabit the mountain valleys around the dolmens make believe that their portals lead to other worlds inhabited by giants, gods, and snakes. There are several adiga clans, women of which are able to travel through the portals of dolmens. In the 19th century, the great game between the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Porte, Iran, and Great Britain began around the Caucasus, sadly continued. The ability of the Circassians to get artifacts filled with magic turned out to be a very important resource for everyone. It is really sad that there was this great game of trying to find out who's in power, whilst they're trying really hard to protect their spiritual and ancient sites. So there's this military rise of power. Well, I call it fake power because it is. And there are these lovely people trying to protect anything which is of value to them as much as they can. And what is really sad is that some Russians are not nice. Some Russian archaeologists call the dolmens Russian, and they're not Russian, they are Circassian. And some Russian men are extraordinary. Among them is Professor or Dr. Tortkhaninov, a very honest man. And this Russian man never ever called Circassian findings as Russian. He always acknowledged the honest truth about it. And one of them is the Kuban findings. And for the life of me, I can't find the same beautiful image that I found before of the Kuban findings, which includes a beautiful, intricately made horse. You could see everything with utmost clarity. It's as if it's about to breathe life, come to life, and move with grace and ease. It looked so beautiful. I just wish I could find it. I tried for hours. I'm really sorry. I don't know where I went wrong in the usage of my keywords. But there we are. Now, it is said 100,000 years ago, there was Lemuria in the north, Atlantis in the south. And at the time, everyone lived in peace. And the size of the earth was much smaller than what we have now. The continents were one land. And the distance from the earth, from the sun, was very different. But sadly, some form of energy changed and caused a division to take place. And so the continents and the tectonic plates moved apart. I remember meeting a Swiss man, and I said to him, the Caucasus and Switzerland share the same tectonic plates. And he went, oh, we're long-distance cousins. Bless him. I'm trying to see my notes, do forgive me. There was a time when, after the fall of Atlantis, a lot of Atlantis's culture was kept by a group of people called the Khmer people. Archaeologists are debating how is it that they have Circassian sounding and meaning names like Psau Sinis. Ps means water in Circassian. Psau Sinis means I come, and water also gives life. So ps means to give life. It has dual meaning. So Psau Sinis means I come with the good intention to give you life. And my father took me to a beautiful museum in Egypt. It was, of course, the ancient Egyptian-based museum, and he covered the meaning of one of the captions because they're written in several languages. So he covered the English one. He said, watch this. He called my mother and asked her, what does it mean? And she gave the same exact meaning when he uncovered the caption. So how is it that Circassian language permeated ancient Egyptian language? We have no idea. Because you look at the symbols of ancient Circassian language and ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, they're not the same. But if you listen to their sounds, and you listen to their meanings, and if you study Circassian, how is it that they have Circassian names? How is it that their kings and queens have Circassian names? One of them is Nefertiti, not Nefertiti, it's Nefertiti. Tite means it is ours. Nefin means the light. My mother's name is Nefin. And she said she believes, again, this is her personal view, please don't take it personally. She said she believes that there was a time when the continents were together, and so they were closer to the Caucasus. And this is just a theory in her head, but it's a possibility, we don't know. And after some time, they went down to what we now call Egypt, or what ancient Egyptians call Khmer or Khmer. There are different variants of its pronunciation in ancient Egypt. So the ancient Egyptian word for ancient Egypt is either Khmer or Khmer. This is a male warrior's outfit, very similar to a female one. And again, Shadowan, Tse, the plethora of weapons that they carry upon their person, and always notice that with their daggers and swords, there isn't something to protect the hand for ease of movement. Agility is one of their strengths. They don't believe in carrying heavy weapons. They believe speed is power. This is a beautiful Circassian motif. I might adopt this and have it sewn upon my dress, I'm not sure. But again, it's based on plants and energy movement. Energy flows. It's all about the flow of energy. And a Circassian motif usually has long, slender lines, and at the end of the lines, there are these slender, beautiful cursive motifs at the end of them. That's also another variant. These are family emblems. And in every house of a Circassian, inside and out, they have these family emblems. And again, they're based on energy. And they have their own stories, so each represents a story. And I find this star fascinating. I wonder what kind of people they were to have a star. And so they represent jobs of how they conduct their energy. I know it sounds strange, but for example, there's one which I found, a Circassian emblem, and it looks like a man forging a sword. And so the family members who create swords. And it's someone who utilizes a lot of spiritual power to create a sword. My grandfather's family emblem from my mother's side, his family name is Gwash. And I have a story to tell about his family name. This is the closest I could find to depict it, and it means able to come out of a difficult situation. So if someone has a difficult situation, they go up to a family member, they see the symbol on their house, they welcome them in, they talk about their difficult situation, they come up with potential solutions. And that is the way they thought. Very simplistic, but somehow it miraculously, quite often it would work through meditative practice. They would sit in silence, and they would sit in a very upright manner, the way I depicted. And they would wait for the answer to come to them. So in a meditative practice, as part of their spiritual practices. Now, Marie Antoinette. I don't know exactly how she came across about who Circassians are, but for some time she adopted a part of their style, perhaps the opening here, and this is called robe à la Circassienne. And it became very popular in the French courts, and it began to spread across France and some parts of Europe, and that's the view from behind. That's robe à la Circassienne. And here's a 1700s print depicting, in writing, it says here, robe à la Circassienne here. And again, it's the opening in the front and the opening from the waist down, adopted into a 1700s style manner of dress. And here's another view of it. So this is a different dress, of course, but it's also similar to the earlier light blue dress shown earlier on. Now, before I continue about books, which I have been told are worthy of a read, but again, each to their own. If you read the synopsis and you feel it's not for you, that's fine. No offense taken. I'm going to read out a few interesting random facts about Circassians. Scythians, Sumerians, and Hittites have links to Circassian culture, in addition to ancient Greeks and ancient Egyptians. It baffles archaeologists because they see things from a certain point of view. They are quite used to seeing things from a certain point of view, and then another one comes up and it opens a whole world to them. They just wonder, how is it that they're all interlinked? It's a story and a half for each and every one of them. I met one Scottish man. He came up to me and he asked me where I'm from, so I told him. And then he unbuttons his shirt, he shows a Scythian tattoo. It's a Scythian horse. And he said, "This is from your people. I got the impression that you are unusual because the way you speak to people is not quite, native British. And yes, you have an accent, but it's also the way you speak. It's very unusual." And he said, "Scythians are from the Caucasus." And I was, gosh, someone's been reading, which is nice. And it's all right if you don't know, it's fine. I mean, we're a small ethnic group with an unknown country. It's bound to happen that people don't know. Another random fact about Circassians is that their courting manners are very different to what I have seen here, but there are some similarities between courting aspects of native British people and courting aspects of Circassians. One of them is that they take their time getting to know the person, which is the logical thing to do. But there is a story which I wish to share, and I believe it's worthy of a listen. One day, a Circassian lady and a gentleman fall in love, and she accepts his hand in marriage. It's always up to the lady to decide whether she wishes to marry someone or not. And he asked her, "So when would you like me to kidnap you?" They have a strange kidnapping thing, but it's always up to the lady as to when would she like to be kidnapped, how would she like to be kidnapped. And
Very all kidnappers.
I know, so I'm not sure if kidnap is the right word. Perhaps elope.
So I know that Kazakhstan has a similar kind of tradition, so are the two related?
Pardon?
I know that Kazakhstanis have a similar tradition with the kidnapping, so are they kind of vaguely related?
They are different, but it's always up. It's always up to the lady. Sorry. Nothing. And so what happened was that. Now this is in modern times. They have a car, and he said, "Look, tell you what. On this and that day, I'll pick you up, and you have your things and everything that you wish to wear that day ready." And please select a beautiful bridal dress to your interest, be it Circassian or modern. I'll pay for it. Very nice man. And she and him sat together and decided how they will elope or kidnap each other. And so he tried to elope with her via means of an automobile or a car. That didn't work. Her parents found out where she was staying, and they took her back home. And then one day, the family of the bride-to-be are sitting in a garden. This is in Jordan, by the way. They're all Circassians having tea and cake and holding up their saucers and their teacups. When all of a sudden, at the end of their long stretch of their green lawn, there's this tall hedge, green hedge. All of a sudden, from behind that hedge, there's a Circassian man on a horse. And they all suddenly stopped having whatever they're having. He galloped as fast as he can towards his bride, and he gestured this to her, meaning, "I'm ready to take you." She immediately rode, and he helped her upon the horse. She waved goodbye to her family, and he galloped away and jumped above the hedge, and they all just sat there like this. To this day, and I have met the couple, by the way, they're still in love. And then my friend who knows them said, "Now look at these two here. And they are barely talking to each other." And I asked him, "Who are they?" "They are the family members from each side of the family. To this day, they don't talk to each other." They just say hello, and they sit looking in different opposite directions. It's a true story. And to this day, that lovely couple are still together, madly in love, bless them. When it comes to courting, I remember seeing a gorgeous young Circassian man, my own personal story, among the many whom I tried to court. Believe me, I tried. And I came up to him and I said, God, he was gorgeous. I came up to him and I said, and I thought to myself, come what may, I shall accept the end result. You're so beautiful. May I say that you're one of the most beautiful men I've ever seen in my life? Would you ever consider courting me and perhaps considering marrying me in the future? And his face turned red I mean, he already had these bright pink cheeks. So his face turned blaringly red. And he cast down his vivid blue eyes. And he said, Ridade, you're a lovely person, but my heart does not feel the same way about you as I do. And I was just, oh. I know. And I said to him, oh, I see. Well, thank you for letting me know as to how you feel about me. And he said, please do understand, I have nothing but high regard for you, but I can't fall in love with someone whom I have no feelings of being in love for. And it won't bode us both well, you know. I do hope you understand. I said, I see, all right. So I let him be. The next day, my mother drops me off and she goes, oh my God, he's beautiful, marry him, marry him. Believe me, I tried to court him. And did he say yes? No. What? Silly boy. Bless her. She tried really hard sometimes. She'd come up to a young man. My daughter's available. She has a very operatic voice. Would you be interested in marrying her? And I was just, oh God, no. And then she'd turn around and say, I'm only joking. It's all jokey courtship. Yes, of course it is. Yes, I know, but not this way. Because Circassians openly declare their children to potential suitors. So there we have it. Now, in terms of Circassians practicing yoga, it's interesting. My mother once walked in to the living room and she saw my grandfather doing the handstand, and she turns around and sees my grandmother doing the handstand, and at the time she wore these huge white frilly bloomers. So if you could just imagine that. And then she asked them, what are you doing? And she replied, my grandmother replied, your father would not leave me alone until I did the handstand. And she said, it's a good thing we're not expecting any guests. Yes. Bless them. Anyways, moving on to another story. I remember once my mother explained this story to me, and I felt very sorry for my grandfather. My grandfather was 5 years of age when a silly religious person came to the Circassian village in Turkey and said, from now on, no musical instruments, no dancing, no singing. And it just moved him. It just angered him. And he even said that he remembers feeling something like being crushed, something oppressive happened in him. And he absolutely abhorred religion since that time onwards. And he vowed never to be religious, ever. One day, many years later, this is after he served World War II, thank God he survived. One day, he's back from work, and at the time in 1940s Turkey, men wore Western European or English style of clothing, so suits, a beige mac, and he was wearing a wide-brimmed fedora hat. He comes home, very weary from work, puts his hat down, and slumps onto his chair. The door knocks. He answers the door. Two Circassian young men. Good evening, sir. We are Circassian men, and we would like to ask your permission to invite your daughter to come and dance with us. And he suddenly went, dance! Dance! And then he calls out to my mother, Nevin! And she runs out of the room. What is it? Dance! What is it? Dance! What? Just dress up. Wear your best dress. We're off to dance. And then she said, Father, I've got an exam. Forget the exam. We're off dancing tonight. So she got dressed, and he began to watch my mother. And how did she know that he was watching her? Was that she'd take little glances at his direction, and he'd just turn around. And by time, boys start circulating her and start courting her. You have such beautiful eyes. Will you consider marrying me? And then one young man steps in front of him. Oh, forget him, he's useless. You can marry me instead. And then he thought to himself, even though she's a tomboy, she can get married. Because he was so worried that her tomboyish ways would put them off, but he was wrong. He was so happy. And that night she could hear her father and her mother stop talking animatedly to each other. And then she was approached by several young men, and they began to court her. And then they both went, "We shall have grandchildren." Obsessed about having grandchildren. Bless them. One sad story with a happy ending. My grandfather in Turkey was not allowed to keep his Circassian name and surname. One day he hears a knock on the door, and a Turkish policeman or a military man, I can't remember which one, is standing at the door, and he's announcing to my grandfather, "You're a Circassian. As with Circassians, Armenians, Kurds, Chechens, etc., you're not allowed to have Circassian names." My grandfather looked at him and he said, "How dare you tell me that? I've owned that name since I was born. It dates back hundreds of thousands of years. How dare you come into my home and tell me this?" And then he said, "Well, you're under arrest." So they took him and put him in jail. After some time, maybe a couple of days, a man walks in. He doesn't look Turkish. And my grandfather looked at him and he asks in Circassian, after he greets him, "We mahuf'ul. Are you Circassian?" And he lit up and he goes, and he said, "Excuse me, excuse me," and he's speaking in Circassian, "Don't you see that I'm in jail? Why are you smiling? Get me out of here. Tell these clowns that I'll never change my name." And he went, "What? They put you in here for that reason? What a stupid bunch of people. Right, I'm getting you out." So thank God he appeared and freed my grandfather, and my grandfather did not face any further charges. Thank God. Up until the 90s, Circassians were almost marginalized and unheard of in Turkey by the Turkish government. I remember meeting one proficient Turkish politician. He's the son of a Turkish politician who hated anyone except Turks. And I did not know that. I was 16 with my brother who was 14 at the time, and we approached him, and it's a congregation of different nations in a Turkish embassy. This is when they began to acknowledge that we exist, which is nice. And when I told him, when he asked where I'm from, that I'm a Circassian, his smile stiffened. And I thought, something doesn't look right. And when I told my mother who he was and his first and last name, she lit up. She hugged me tightly and she said, "Well done. He's the son of that man who abhorred anyone except Turkish people." And I went, "Really? Ha ha ha, excellent." Well done for not holding it back in your system. Because some Circassians sadly would lie and say to Turkish people, "Yes, I'm Turk," to avoid altercations, arguments. You'd be amazed how many times. Yes.
That's pretty good reason.
Yeah, because when Circassians came from the Caucasus to the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomans were not welcoming to them. As soon as they'd finished settling down in one area, the Ottoman army personnel would come up to Circassians and say, "Right, time for you to move. But we just finished building our homes. You said we were welcome to stay here." Well, government policy. And so they had to move, otherwise they would be killed. Very nice of them, Turkish people. Circassians in Jordan. When Circassians started settling down, which I think was a big mistake, such a big mistake, leaving the Caucasus, unbelievable. Arab Bedouin tribes came up to them. "What are you doing?" "Well, we have nowhere else to go. They'll kill us if we go back, or we'll have to live under their rule." "Well, you can't live here." "Well, show us where to live then." And they weren't welcoming to them. They too faced altercations of a different kind. Here's a piece of history not written in history books in Jordan. There was a time when Palestinians were fighting Jews. And the Circassians, being warriors, they thought, let us help them. So they were given tanks. And basically, when the Jews started approaching with their weapons, Arabs began to bolt, and some of them jumped out of the tanks. The Circassians opened the covers of the tanks, and they called out to them, "Get back in there, you cowards! Come on, fight!" And they just didn't. They just carried on running away. Oh my God. And the Circassians gestured to each other, right, back in the tanks, we'll sort out this lot. And they tried their best. And they did sort out a group of them, but not every one of them. But they would never abandon ship. They are types of people whom, if you ask them to fight for you, and you're worthy of a fight, they would. That's how they are. And that is why the royal family prefer Circassians as their personal guard than Arabs, because they know they are loyal fighters. Once I was in Jordan sitting behind my mother driving her car, and a policeman stops the car, and she's like, "Oh God, I do hope he's a decent man." So you can guess what kind of experiences she had. So she lowers the window a bit, just a bit, and she asks in Arabic, in her broken Arabic, "إيش بدك?" "من فضلك أنا عندي طفلة." I have a child. She's speaking in broken Arabic. And then he looked at her face, and he looked at my face. He said, "You're Circassians. Look, hand on heart, I will leave you alone because you're honest, decent people." I was amazed by his response to us. And she said, "Really? You'll forgive me for driving a bit quickly because I have to get her back. She has an exam to study for." He said, "It's fine. I'll let you be. Don't worry." We were amazed that this man let us be, because some Arabs are not nice to Circassians. And I have many Circassian male friends who could tell you a plethora of stories of them fighting for their women, fighting for them. And I know one man, he's in his 30s. He's so exhausted of fighting. He asked me, "What are English people like? Is it worthy of a move there?" And I said, "Believe me, they are wonderful. You have nothing to worry about. Just don't bring up stories of angst at a repeated rate because, dampens anyone's spirit, including them. I know you've been through a lot, but there are therapists. You can offload a wealth of it to their direction and, a bit of it to a non-therapist." And he went, "Fair enough." Because he's so exhausted, he's lost count as to how many Arab men he fought to protect Circassian women